What's up everybody, it's Rob from Psychic Games, and we're here with the Dark Archive playtest for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. That's right, we have a new playtest coming out with two new classes, the Psychic and the Thaumaturge. Now the Psychic technically isn't a new class, they were from Pathfinder 1st Edition in the Occult Adventures book, so they are not a new class, but the Thaumaturge is a new class. So this video will be discussing and taking a look at the Psychic class themselves. Now, the Psychic in 1E was a bit of a weird class because they were okay if you were playing an adventure that actually worked with a Psychic, but in most times they kind of didn't really fit that well into an adventure. There are a lot of like mental spells. The main thing for Psychic was that you don't really speak your spell, you kind of mentally do your spells. So we'll kind of see how the spells work. This is the Psychic Iconic, which is a pretty cool picture, by the way. Them kind of floating like that. Uncommon makes sense, it's not a common class to really be out there. In this, they'll be trained in the occult spells, they have occult spells, makes sense. The other thing that was a bit of an issue in 1E was that the Psychics had their own spell list, and it wasn't that great of a spell list, to be fair. I feel like there was some things there that kind of left you really wanting. And I'm going to go through, so basically the Psychic spellcasting is essentially when you cast spells, the speaking, your verbal components, you do a mental one instead, and you can also substitute material with somatic components as well. Although this is more like, you know, either head motions or some motions as opposed to having to use materials. And same thing as other spells, heightened cantrips, all that stuff. I'm not going to go over that. Spell repertoire is just pretty much your spells that you gain. You can swap spells, as you kind of see the whole 2-2 section that they have. This is the new thing, the Psy cantrips and amps. So Psy cantrips are basically kind of like your focus spells in a way, where there are specific cantrips that you get based on whatever your conscious mind is, which is kind of your class focus, if you will. And amps are basically, you cast these spells, you can use an amp, a focus point, to amplify the spell, and it will actually do additional effects with it. Now it says over here that you start with 2 focus points. You can spend them either to cast focus spells, or you can spend them only on amps. So this is important because over here, if you spend at least 2 focus points and spend focus points only to amp Psy cantrips, since the last time you refocused, you regain 2 focus points as opposed to just 1. That's basically the key thing there, is that if you just amplify your spells, you gain your focus points back quicker than using them to cast spells. Now, the conscious subconscious minds, you get 2 different types of this testing: emotional acceptance and precise discipline. So emotional acceptance, this determines what your key ability score is. In this case, it's charisma. And it kind of just talks about basically you're more of an emotional, like almost like an empath kind of caster. You can see when it says you cast a spell, you replace any material components with somatic and any verbal components with emotion as you call up and hold a specific feeling. So basically the way like lore sense kind of works is you would think up a feeling that would make you angry or something wrathful, or would make you feel with rage, and you would use that emotion to possibly channel it into like a damaging spell, or you know, something that terrifies you, make you afraid, and use that feeling to cast a spell that, you know, does the same thing to somebody else. So that's kind of the way that works. And you may also kind of have, it says as well, like abstract vivid effects around you, bright colors or weird shapes, kind of or like maybe something like dark and blue for like melancholy type feeling. However, because you're so tied to emotion, if you're affected by a harmful emotion effect, the discarded emotions sap some of your concentration, causing your cantrips to actually lower down one level. So an example, like if you're level 5, if you're under a harmful emotion effect, you can only cast your cantrips up to a 2nd level and not a 3rd level. So there's some downside to that. Now, precise discipline is specific, intended outcomes, very calculated. You have your focus, your thoughts are kind of in order. And it shows by your key ability score being intelligence. Makes sense, you're kind of really in tune with your mind. And same thing, as opposed to thinking of emotion, you're more thinking of calculation, determining the exact forces that need to be aligned to realize your magic, basically. Like it says here, like example, you mentally weigh how heavy something might be, kind of levitate it, or how much energy would be needed to combust something. These kind of calculation things work on pretty much how you would cast your spells. And it's, as opposed to these bright flashy colors, here it says it's a lot more like mathematical spirals or harmonic tones, very calculated, systematic type of effects. However, because of that, it makes it very hard for you to focus sometimes. You're flat-footed against any attacks made for you when you cast a spell. So pretty much, if you cast a spell, you're flat-footed if it provokes, basically, because you're just too engaged in casting your spell. And if your spell is disrupted, you're stupefied for a turn, which affects your casting until the next turn. This really throws you out of your way. So you don't want to provoke while you're casting your spells if you pick this subconscious mind. Now, conscious mind, these are the different types you get. They give you spells, they give you side cantrips, and they give you a deeper side cantrip. So for this one, we have 3 different types that they're given for the playtest: Distant Grasp, Infinite Eye, and the Silent Whisper. These are all really cool sounding names, I must say. So, Distant Grasp is motion, categorizes the physical. Something falls, something turns. Kind of believe that you can move things as well, almost like a telekinetic style of playing. And you can see based on the spells that they give you: Magic Missile, Telekinetic Maneuver, Levitate, Fly, Wall of Force, Force Cage, Earthquake. It's all about moving things around or building things to stop things from moving. And we see for Mage Hand, for instance, you have an amp. Your added focus increases your hand's Telekinetic Finesse. Your hand can actually grasp an attended object if it's attended by you or a willing ally and is in an easy to access place. So pretty much you can actually grab like a potion off somebody's body, you or your ally, and you're with Mage Hand. That's pretty cool. Telekinetic Projectile, you can amp it. So normally it does 1d6, but you can amp it so it does 1d8 instead. And if it crits, it'll actually push them back 5 feet from the force. So it pretty much makes you an even stronger Telekinetic Projectile, which is a really good cantrip in 2e. You can see you get Telekinetic Rend as also, which is right here. And this is: your mind creates a violent axis of motion in a nearby space. You deal 1d6 bludgeoning or 1d6 slashing to all creatures. It's a 5-foot burst, so a nice little burst of area, little 2x2 square. And you choose bludgeoning or slashing depending on what type. If you amp it, you can add another 5-foot burst to the area, but they can't overlap. And and obviously, if it says, if there's a large creature that's in both of them, you take damage only once. And the burst damage does 1d6 and 1d6 slashing. It does bludgeoning and slashing, as opposed to picking both. So this pretty much is a way for you to have a telekinetic AoE, basically, which is a pretty cool effect. Obviously, it is a cantrip spell. Arrest trajectory. This is another really cool one. This is if you want to be a pure like Jedi kind of. As a reaction, you or an ally are the target of a physical range strike. You arrest the projectile in midair. The target gains a +1 bonus to the AC. If the attack misses, the projectile clatters to the ground. So basically, if someone shoots an arrow at somebody, to say that, you can technically, in your mind, you actually hold it in place, and if it misses, it just falls to the ground. That's a really cool effect. Let's be real. Now, at first glance, you may go, the +1 isn't that big of a difference, but in Pathfinder, a +1 or +2 is a massive difference. It can literally be a make or break situation. Combined with everything else, that's, frightened, flanking, other bonuses, also stuff. A +1 can really make or break it. So, and if you heighten it up to 7th, it's a +2 instead. So, that essentially is a good reaction in a class that probably doesn't have many reactions to begin with. That allows you to essentially stop an attack from hitting. You can amp it if you want. So when you amp it, after you block it, instead of it just dropping, you essentially throw it back at the person, which essentially is a telekinetic projectile spell, basically. Using that object. So depending on if it's an arrow, it'll do piercing. If it's like a boulder, it'll do bludgeoning and so forth. You are slowed 1 until the end of your next turn. Not terrible. But at least it does give you this cool little weird counterattack, basically. So by the way, this is a pretty cool psychic class. It kind of really focuses on that moving things, stopping things, and kind of the force of momentum, basically. Infinite Eye is the kind of the observation, the studying, the knowledge of seeing things. And you can see that by the spells: True Strike, Augury, Clairaudience, Clairvoyance, Prying Eye, True Seeing, Detect Magic, Guidance. It has all these kind of spells that are all about revealing what's really there, or kind of making sure something hits its target. The amps for the Detect Magic help you, give you bonuses against a particular magic type when you identify it. The amp for Guidance, instead of if someone uses Guidance and they crit fail, they only fail instead. Pretty good. Mental Scam. It's a 30-foot cone cantrip that is a verbal one action cast. And you pretty much can choose anything in the area, you can kind of seek at it. And it casts as preparing to aid an ally of your choice on an attack roll. So basically, you can try and actually, so say to someone you can't see, you can mentally scan and give them a free aid. And if you amplify it, you can actually learn the creature's strength and weaknesses. So you learn the saving throw, the best saving throw, the worst saving throw, and all your allies get a +1 bonus to attack and damage against that creature. And then if you mental scan them and then you aid, the bonuses become a +2. So this really is all about kind of helping your party focus and say, okay, I'm seeing that target, I know that target, I know what they're weak against. Future Path is also really cool. It's a 2-action spell that if you pretty much get to a free stride and it doesn't trigger reactions. So pretty much you cast it, you can move, and when you move, it doesn't trigger any sort of reactions from attacks of opportunity. Now, you can amplify it, and when you amplify it, it will actually allow you to move twice. You can move 50 feet, 60 feet. Or, if you want, you can use the heightened 8th one once you get that far to actually make it so where you allow your ally to move without triggering any reaction. So say someone's in a really bad place, you can give them the ability to kind of see exactly where they have to move to avoid attacks of opportunity, and they can get out of there safely. That's pretty cool. Now, it's a lot of a different playstyle compared to the version we saw with the Distant Grasp, but it's still pretty cool. Silent Whisper is all about like telepathy and like connecting with people's minds and, you know, talking to them, messing with them. You have Daze, which gives them weakness to mental damage. You have Message, which has an amp to it, which gives you the ability to allow you to coordinate your actions and allies with an ally. You can immediately have an ally get a reaction to step or stride from you talking to them. Pretty much you can be like, okay, listen, I have this plan, let's go, this is the message, you can work together. You can see for the spells, Mind Link, Remove Fear, Telepathy, Sending, you know, Synaptic Pulse, all these kind of spells that really delve deep into the mind. Nudge Intent. It's something like a command, basically. You kind of target the person's mind, and they choose either strike, cast a spell, or use a skill action. And they must choose to do that outcome. So pretty much you can choose a strike, choose cast a spell, or use a spell. So pretty much, and if they don't do it, they get frightened. It gets frightened and it has to do the action. So you can tell the person, okay, I want you to trip instead of casting a spell. Now you may go, well, what's the point of this? Well, the point of this is casting a spell is probably one of the best ones in the sense of if they can cast a spell, they have to cast a spell, technically. Or they have to do a will save. But if they cast a spell, they pick up 2 actions, so maybe they have a 2-action ability that they can't use anymore. Or maybe they're going to use an ability that maybe they would cast a spell and move, but now they have to attack. Maybe you told them to strike. You know, you tell a wizard he has to strike, basically. So that kind of way to mess around with the turn is interesting, and if they don't do what you tell them to do, they have to roll the will save to get the frighten effect. And Shatter Mind is pretty much a 15-foot cone AoE that does mental damage. Now, Unleash Psyche, this is actually something that's really cool. I forget what it was called in 1E, but there was some psychics that had the ability to kind of go almost a bit into an overdrive, if you will. Their powers would enhance, and they would either have like an additional effect while they're doing this. Usually the DCs will increase for their spells when they were kind of in this mode, and it will last a few turns, basically, until they kind of have to come down from this. Now this kind of mimics that in this unleashing their intense like psychic power. And here it says, you see, it lasts for 3 rounds. You can amp 1 cantrip each round without paying the focus point cost. So pretty much any cantrips you cast, you can just amp them for free for those 3 rounds. Now, the cool thing about this is there are specific triggers to activate these. You can't just start the battle in this overdrive mode. So the first one is Unleash Focused Intent. And the requirement is your 3rd turn of the encounter or later. So it has to be round 3 or more. And pretty much when you activate it, whenever you cast a spell, you gain a status bonus to the spell's damage equal to double the spell's level as long as the spell deals damage. So you cast a 3rd level spell, it does 6 more damage. The drawback, however, is that you're so into this focus on doing damage, you're not really caring about defense, so you have -2 to your AC. But all your spells do, you know, if it's a 5th level spell, it's doing 10 more damage. If it's a first level spell, doing 2 more damage and so forth. But you gotta be careful about being hit. Everything else is generally the same kind of stuff, you know, skill feats, signature spells, ability boosts, a boost to your reflexes, fortitude, will saves. You know, will save, Fortress of Will is pretty much your Iron Will way to get rid of that. Eventually you gain 90th level, gives you your 10th level spell slots, so you have that. So let's go through these psychic feats. So, Ancestral Mime is you can cast any innate spells you know from an ancestry feat or heritage using your psychic spell casting components. Pretty much say your ancestry or heritage give you access to spells like a Kitsune or a Fae or something along those lines. This will allow you to use your psychic powers to cast those spells. That way you can still be kind of merge into that type of casting. Counter Thought. You can counter the triggers, you can pretty much counter mental casting spells. Now, it's interesting. It's pretty much a way to counterspell mental spell slots. I don't know how many of those there are off the top of my head, but it could be a really cool one. Especially if it's a campaign that has a lot of psychic characters in it, or occult characters in it, it would be a really cool way to kind of deal with them. Mental Buffer gives you resistance to mental damage. Pretty much you make your mind stronger. And the resistance is half your level, but it increases to your level while your psyche is unleashed, basically. Psychic Rapport just gives you bonuses to a bunch of skills when you're under some sort of mental effect. Now, the next psyche we see is Unleash Self-Defense. This is the defensive one. And you can see the requirements for this one is you've cast 2 beneficial spells on yourself or an ally this encounter, each on a different round. So pretty much you've cast 2 different spells that have benefited your party somehow. Shield, whatever have you, something along the lines. While the psyche is unleashed, you gain a +1 status bonus to your AC and to 1 saving throw of your choice. All of your spells that don't have the death trait gain the non-lethal trait. Pretty much you're all focused on, you know, buffing your defense, and you're not worried about killing anybody right now. However, because of that, the drawback is your spell damage rolls are actually weaker. You have a penalty on your hits and your penalty to the damage that is done. So if you unleash this kind of psyche, you probably don't want to be casting your damaging spells at this point. You kind of want to be casting more utility spells, more support spells, doing that. Cantrip Expansion, this gives you more cantrips. Mental Balm gives you a special amp that essentially allows someone to gain a bonus to their will save against certain effects. Warp Space. So, Warp Space allows you to amp a spell. Say you don't have visibility on a target, on the cover from where you are. You can choose a different square and you can have the spell act as if it's coming from that side where there might be no cover. It's a really cool effect. Will it be used? Again, depends on the campaign, depends on the way the games are run, if that kind of stuff will come into play, if it's worth it, or if you could just move and get yourself into a position where you can make the attack no problem. That's another thing you gotta be considerate of. Psychic Beacon is kind of when your spell attacks a target, also gives you another amp. So it almost is a way for you to deal with, and a few other classes have something similar. where if the spell hits, you can choose then that it makes the target more visible. So if they're invisible, they're now concealed. If they're concealed, they're now no longer concealed. So pretty much is a way. I know some people have things where they stick a weapon into somebody and it stays there so you can see them, that kind of stuff. This is the same thing, but for psychics. Spontaneous ignition. This is one for your damage spells, and it pretty much gives you a spell fire trait. So it allows you to essentially convert a spell's damage into fire. That's pretty cool, especially if people are weak to fire. You could take like mental damage and turn it into fire. That one's a really cool one. Strain the Mind. You have 0 focus points, and you don't have your Psychic unleashed. And pretty much, you can, instead of amping a spell by paying focus points, you can lose hit points equal to the however much you would have to spend for it. And this is the kind of way to almost be like 11 from Stranger Things in a way, where you have a nosebleed or you're straining as you kind of giving in your own energy to amplify the spell attack. That's not a bad one. Inertial Barrier. This gives you or someone resistance to physical damage. Straight up. Nothing crazy about that one. This one gives you the unique surface cantrip for the conscious mind other than your own. So pretty much, if you want to take a cantrip from another of the mind's specializations. Sixth Sense, I think this is a really cool, it's a really good one as well. This allows you to essentially detect haunts or spirits, just kind of secret checks for them. So a lot of times there's a lot of classes have a way to kind of identify this stuff. This is your way of kind of seeing the spiritual realm, essentially. Thought Form Summoning is if you want to put a summoning type caster, you can kind of create this psychic construct of it instead. It's kind of a strange version of it. And it has resistance, it has weaknesses, and it can pass through spaces. So it's kind of this, instead of creating this actual creature, you instead create this psychic manifestation of him. Unleash Calculated Reasoning. Now this is one that I like personally. You've cast 2 damaging spells since rolling initiative, each on a different round. And while the psychic is unleashed, instead of rolling damage, you choose to do half damage. So pretty much what it means is, instead of rolling the dice, you just take whatever the half is of max damage. So say it's a 10d8 spell, the max damage would normally be 80. Now instead you just say, you know what, I'm just gonna not take a chance, I'm just gonna go right down the middle, 40 damage, and that's how much it's gonna be for the save. It's cool in the sense of if you don't have lucky rolls, like say you're rolling really bad, you could technically roll 30 damage and it would be worse. You could roll more, you could roll 60 damage, but instead you're kind of doing this, pretty much making the spells guarantee that they'll do at least half damage. And the cool thing is there's no drawback, because you've essentially calculated that there's no drawback to your spells. So it's the risk of your spells may not do as much damage, but they won't do as little damage either. You're going to do at least half. So that's a cool one for me. Unleash Soaring Passions is one for more emotion effects. And pretty much, if you succeed in an attack roll, you gain a +2 bonus to your next spell attack roll. And if they fail, their save, they take a -2 to the next save against one of your spells. However, when you fail attack roll, you take a -1 to your next attack roll, if they succeed, they take a +1 on their next. So pretty much, it's a lot of this ebb and flow of if you succeed, you gain bonuses, but if you lose, you gain penalties. If the enemy succeeds, they gain bonuses. If they fail, they get penalties. So it's a lot of that back and forth in that one. Deeper Breakthrough gives you the deeper side cantrip for your specific mind. Lingering Psyche is a really good one. It allows you to increase your Psyche mode up to 5 rounds as opposed to 3 rounds. So 2 more rounds of those Psychic abilities. Mental Static. You roll a critical success on a will save against a mental effect. You deal mental damage equal to your level to the triggering creature. So basically, someone tries to affect your mind with a mental effect spell, you instead kind of like counteract and do, 8, 10, 15 damage back to them, depending on whatever your level may be. It is non-lethal, but it's still free damage, so can't go wrong with that. And you critically on a will save, it should be pretty easy for you. Mesmerizing Gaze gives you gives someone a -1, basically to the saving throw against your next spell. You do kind of gain the fascination effect because you pretty much are staring at them, really focus in on them. But it's kind of a way to hopefully get that spell effect to go through. Here are some feats for the conscious minds that we have. Autonomic Clairvoyance for the Infinite Eye. So that's the one that's all about like looking at everything and kind of studying everything. You gain a +1 status bonus to initiative rolls. You are on flat-footed to hidden, undetected, or flank creatures off your level or lower. Or anybody. So pretty much you are immune to flanking anybody off your level or lower. Atomic Telekinesis is for a distant grasp. Obviously, that's the one that all about the moving things around. You can telekinetically perform simple interact actions with squares adjacent to you. So pretty much you don't have to telekinetically use like mage hand of stuff. You can open the door with your mind as opposed to having to actually open a door. Or it says some stuff you can't do, like you can't use to hold items, but you can draw something towards you to hold it. So say you want to reach over to grab a cup, you can pick it up with your mind and hold it, kind of stuff, as opposed to having to actually pick it up and bring it to you. That's a really fun one, I think. Atomic Telepathy for the Silent Whisper one. It pretty much allows you to have a mind link, basically. It's a two-way communication with someone within 15 feet of you. So it allows you to talk to somebody as long as you share language. There's no special effects, like you can't read their thoughts, but you can talk with somebody 15 feet away from you. Strings of Spell expansion gives you 2 more strings of spell slots. Dark Persona. The same enemy has damaged you on at least 2 of its turns in this encounter. Your focus now is on the enemy who damaged you. Whenever you deal damage to the selected enemy with a spell that doesn't have a duration, you gain a status bonus to the damage equal to the spell level, or double the spell level if you cast a spell from your spell slots. So you do more damage to that person, basically. Additionally, you gain temporary hit points equal to the spell's level that lasts until the beginning of your next turn. So you're gaining hit points and you're doing more damage. However, you cannot cast beneficial spells on your allies, and you take a -1 to your DCs and checks against anybody else. And if you defeat your target, the Dark Persona ends. So this is a really good persona if you want to, like, say you're having like a boss fight essentially, you unleash it towards the boss. And then you're focused on the boss. The minions aren't affecting you. But if there's like 4 or 5 goblins or something along that way, you probably don't want to go Dark Persona, because the minute that one Mook minion dies, you snap out of it. So definitely good if the battle will be against a big beefy enemy, or some enemy that's going to last a while. Empathetic connection pretty much allows you to connect with someone. This is the emotional acceptance. We kind of talked about that one that has all about the emotions. If an ally regains hit points due to a triggering effect, you gain half of those hit points as temporary hit points. So pretty much if they regain hit points, you gain some. If an ally gains a status bonus to a type of save, you gain the same bonus. So pretty much you can share the same bonus that someone else may have gotten. But it has to be from an emotion effect. Keep that in mind. Manager of Discipline gives you a +1 status bonus to saving throws against illusions and enchantment effects. So this is specifically for helping for the precise discipline mind, the one that kind of very calculated mind. And you can see it even works for effects like apartment caused by pain. And they work primarily by inflicting pain, such as phantom pain or save of the sting. So this is a way to deal with those. I feel like this one's not as good as empathetic connection, personally. We'll see. Unleash immediate gratification. This one doesn't have a requirement? No. There's no requirement for this one. You gain the basic benefits of having a Psychic Unleashed. Okay, so pretty much there's no requirement because there's no special benefit. It just triggers whenever you want. And as a result, you're stupefied 1 for the duration of your Unleashed Psyche. That's kind of weird. So you have... So there's no requirement, but you are stupefied doing it, which means that you have to make a DC 6 on any spells that you want to cast. That one, it's a cool idea. I just don't like how they did it, personally. Unleash Reflexive Sustainment. You cast a spell with sustained duration during this encounter, and then sustain it on the next turn. You become quick and it can use the additional action to sustain a spell. You can't use... Okay, so pretty much the way this works is that you cast a summon, which you have to sustain it every turn, basically. You do it, you sustain it, then you unleash this mode. When you do that, you become quickened. Now that you become quickened for 3 or 5 turns, depending on how much you do, you can use that free action to sustain it, so it gives you your full 3 actions every turn. Because of this, that you're kind of like splitting your mind in a way, you can't use actions on other people's turns. Conscious Spell gives you more spell slots. We've seen this on pretty much any arcane cast that has those kind of spell feats. Deep Roots is a way for you to kind of deal damage when someone is affected by one of those like control spells, like Command, Dominate Person, those kind of spells. After the spell wears off, they take damage from it, basically. Shadow Space. You are one target of the spell surrounded in a spiral of torn space. Any creature that starts its turn in the aura takes 1d6 slashing damage for every 2 levels of the cantrip with a basic reflex save. So it just fractures reality and does a ton of AoE damage next to around the target. Constant Levitation gives you airwalk for free, basically. But when your Psyche is unleashed, you get Fly. Unleash Poltergeist Phenomenon. You've cast 2 evocation spells that affect an area, each on a different round. while the Psychic is unleashed, you gain an aura of telekinetically whirling debris in a 15-foot emanation. Any creature that starts its turn in the aura takes 1d4 damage for every 2 levels you have. So at this point, level 16, that would be 8d4 damage. And your drawback is you aren't immune to the chaos of your power. Oh, so you take the same damage basically. So you got to make the reflex save, which you do have bonuses against from your class, against the 8d4 damage. But you pretty much have this 15-foot AoE cone AoE around you that can do 8d4 damage to anybody that starts on your turn. That's not bad. 8d4, I mean, it's not a lot. It's like 32 damage, so average, like, say around 20, let's say. 20 damage is still a good chunk. If they critically fail, it's 40 damage, so like, it can add up pretty quickly. Cranial Detonation. There's another amp. The enemy you reduce to 0 hit points dies, and its head explodes. Creates a 15-foot shockwave around the person. Everybody must take 1d4 damage per level of the spell. And it's either a force damage if it's a physical shockwave, or mental damage if it's like a mind shockwave. So pretty much you pop someone's head, and when you pop the head, they does it AoE damage all around it. That is, I mean, it's cool. I mean, it's definitely a cool thing. I can't go wrong. You can't say that that's not cool. Deepest Wellspring gives you more focus points. And of course, your level 20 feats become Thought. You gain resistance 10 to physical damage, but weakness 5 to mental damage, and a weakness 10 to anything that specifically targets spirits, like a spirit blast. Once per century, when you die, you automatically return to life as long as one living sentient creature on your plane remembers you. The memories allow you to reconstruct yourself from their thoughts. You can come back to life as long as someone knows who you are. That is insane. You essentially are, I would say, borderline immortal. And the reason why I say borderline immortal is it's only once per century. So you obviously are going to probably die more than once in a century, unless you have magic to keep you alive. Even if you, like, say you died 50, come back, even if you last another 30, 40 years, that's still not within the century time period. So, like, you would have to kind of find some other way to bring yourself back to life, like a raise dead kind of spell. Dual Amplification. You can apply 2 amps to one spell, basically, as opposed to choosing one. Mind Over Matter gives you an additional 10th level spell slot, and Multifaceted Psyche. If you have at least 2 Unleashed Psyche abilities, you can unleash both of them at the same time with one action, basically. So those are all pretty cool capstone feats, if you will. And that wraps up the look at the Psychic class. Now, my thoughts for the Psychic are, they are actually pretty cool. I mean, I feel like the Psychic is a lot more fun in this version as opposed to 1E, where they were kind of the strange mental caster. I don't think many people even play Psychic. I think more people prefer like Mesmerist or Occultist, where you would have more mental effects in play, as opposed to the Psychic that didn't really have much to go with. They had their own spell list, again, which wasn't that great. Here you have the Occult spell list. You have these cool effects that allow you to kind of connect with allies or do more damage. You can play this kind of in the back type of caster, affecting people, or you can kind of get into the mix of things, you know, unleashing this AoE to kind of control the area and really mess with people. So Lots of cool play styles. My personal picks, I would say that the Distant Grasp is probably the best conscious mind to take. And I would probably take the Emotional Acceptance as the subconscious mind. Those two would be the two that I would pick. And then go from there, you pick whatever psyches you want and spells along the way. So that's how I would play the second class. Let me know how you guys played the second class in the playtests, what your thoughts of this class are. I think they did a really solid job with this one. So if you enjoyed looking at this class, be sure to follow me and subscribe for more Pathfinder 2nd edition content, as well as more class dives into classes like the Thaumaturge, like the Magus, like the Summoner. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see everybody in my next video. Thank you.